The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcast articles and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. You're listening to a Truly Human Leadership podcast refresher, where we reshare insight from podcast episodes from the past. It's really not possible for us to walk in the door of our particular organization, clock in, do our job, and leave. We're there for probably more than 40 hours a week, 48 to 50 weeks a year. The relationships and interactions during that time have a tremendous impact on the rest of our lives. Our friend Shawn Murphy has written a new book, Work Tribes: The Surprising Secret to Breakthrough Performance, Astonishing Results, and Keeping Teams Together. You can check it out at readworktribes.com. You may remember him from his writing for Inc. magazine, his previous book, The Optimistic Workplace. Today, Shawn joins me to talk about belonging. What does that mean in the workplace? So here's Shawn Murphy.
In a time where companies are spending a lot of money to, court and keep high performing talent, it's easy to spend money on things that don't have lasting substance. But when we look at what is it that really inspires people to want to do their best and return to work and enjoy being at work, even when things are stressful or what have you, that more meaningful ties to a company are necessary. And one of those meaningful ties that runs deep and is a basic human need is the sense of belonging. And it's when employees feel valued, wanted, and welcomed that they are able to experience work in a way that is more, in some ways, comfortable, another more accepting, another where they can be more daring with their thinking and their ideas, and sharing them, because some of the worries that a lot of us in companies where belonging isn't prevalent, the mind share is being competed with, do I say this? I can't say this. I got this politics I have to worry about versus, I don't worry about fitting in, but I believe that I belong here. And that's kind of the elevator pitch, is what is belonging? And then how does an individual leader leverage it and help inspire that experience?
So you were talking to different companies to kind of get their experiences, kind of see what look at their paths, the kind of things that they had been going through on their own journeys.
So my research partner and I identified different companies that we were intrigued to learn from and see how belonging, if it existed, how it influences the workforce as well as business outcomes. So we went into LinkedIn, Container Store, Canlis Restaurant, Barry-Wehmiller, and had some conversations in some cases with just managers, in other cases with managers down through individual contributors. And the book, basically, what we did is we then took all of that input and created a framework around what is it that these companies are doing that allows for this experience of belonging to emerge, and then also shape not just the relationships, but also how those relationships that are formed by a sense of belonging then kind of create a different path forward for the teams to actually perform at extraordinary levels. In comparison, I think in companies where belonging is not prevalent, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, there's a lot of noise that gets in the way of performing, getting things done. right? Whether it be, gosh, this person over here really ignores me and really has no interest in my opinions or ideas, or I'm constantly reminded of, all the different mistakes I make. Those kind of interactions color how employees experience what they do on a day-to-day basis. And when there are negative influences, performance is obviously and understandably is undermined. But when we went into these companies, what we saw, and in some cases it was just absolutely beautiful, was how a sense of belonging allowed their employees to not just have a greater experience at work, but to also take that experience and let it transform the way that they work or who they are outside of work, because they have so much support in these companies where belonging is so strong and profound that that commitment to the company is deepened, but at the same time that company shows interest in the employees beyond who they are just at work. And so it really just what we saw was just a very different way of the employees interacting with management and employees interacting with the organization, that there wasn't as, I don't want to say that there aren't issues, because that would be rather naive. But what did emerge is the conversations are vastly different when that sense of belonging is present, and those conversations led to greater commitment, stronger, high-quality relationships, and team bonding that is way more interesting and profound than teams that just work together because they've got to get stuff done.
Where did you get the idea to do this?
Well, so a couple things. Brené Brown did some work on belonging, and in fact, it's probably some of her most well-known topics that she has written about and researched. For me, though, it was a personal topic. Growing up, I was, that awkward kid that struggled to feel like he belonged. I think then I worried about fitting in, and fitting in is not belonging, and belonging is what you want. You don't want people fitting in. So this idea of what I personally struggled with in terms of what happens when I didn't feel like I belonged. And then when I wrote my first book, The Optimistic Workplace, some of the findings pointed to this concept of belonging, and I thought, not only is it personally interesting to me, given what I struggled with as a young teenager, but I've consulted in organizations where there were toxic behaviors, and I saw how those behaviors were just ripping apart teams, and in some cases totally affecting how successful the organization was, how successful the company is or was. So it really became like this revelatory, this is the topic that I need to expand on. But it started with a very personal interest in it.
Did you have any preconceived ideas when you started talking to these companies? I mean, you chose these particular companies for a reason, I'm assuming. Did you have any preconceived notions when you went into talking to people and doing interviews?
Oh, gosh, yeah. The one thing that surprised me and still surprises me is, the way the book is constructed is there are three parts. The first part is talking about how important the experience of belonging can be. The second part is the part where those preconceived notions that surprised me, and it was around kind of what gets in the way of belonging. And my assumption, based somewhat on research that I had been reading, was that technology does not contribute to the experience of belonging. So I'll give you an example. When you think about teams that might have members across the country or around the globe, and those team members who are not physically located where maybe the bulk of the team is, the assumption that I had going into the book that did not ferret out in the research was that technology was a barrier to belonging, especially for that team member who isn't physically located with the rest. And what I found in our conversations and reading research that was more current is, while yes, it's definitely more difficult, and we can get into why if you want in a second, but what research is finding is our brains are adapting to these digital interactions, and as a consequence of that, we have biological responses that actually help contribute to developing bonds with others, even though we may not physically see them in the same space. So that was surprising to me, that actually technology, while on one hand it certainly takes longer for those bonds and belonging to form, they, however, do form, and our brain does produce the chemicals that contribute to bonding and connection, which are all key to belonging. So that was a big surprise. I think the other thing too is how belonging is lumped in with diversity and inclusion. And while it makes sense that they're connected together, in fact, that's what LinkedIn does. They have what they call the DIBS team, the Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging team. Belonging isn't some program. So I went into it thinking belonging isn't a program. Belonging is what emerges with intentional actions by a leader to help facilitate people on the team feeling valued, wanted, and welcomed, and that a program isn't necessary to do that. That's just a choice that a leader makes. Well, at LinkedIn, they actually have found a way to operationalize belonging in a way that I think doesn't make it a program, but as much as puts into place the infrastructure that facilitates employees feeling a sense of belonging. And I can give you an example. They have a program there at LinkedIn where, throughout the year, their employees spend time out in the community where they are physically located. And the idea behind that is, just think about it, kind of a neighborhood, right? If you live in a neighborhood and you know who your neighbors are and you spend time getting to know them, you start to identify with that location, that place. This is my home. These are my friends. These are my neighbors, right? You start to have a narrative around that neighborhood that helps you go, yeah, this is my place. This is where I live. Maybe this is where I belong. So the idea that LinkedIn sends their employees out to be part of the neighborhood. In fact, when we went, my research partner and I were talking with employees at the San Francisco location. Where they are located, there's a fairly prevalent homeless population, and so some of them actually spend time with the homeless in that area, and doing whatever they're doing in that on their, I think they call it end day. So knowing who is in your neighborhood, knowing that you're contributing to maybe making it better, or that you're starting to build ties with other people within the neighborhood where the business is located, that starts to create a different relationship to how you identify with work, right? It's not just a place I go to get stuff done. I have meetings, I have projects, I have deadlines, etc. It's also, I work in a neighborhood, and when I know the people in my neighborhood, it further deepens my connection to the company, to the team, to the work that I do. So that to me was really interesting. It's like, okay, I could totally see how that works and the psychology behind that, as opposed to like, oh, well, let's just have a day where we have everybody, do show and tell. Well, show and tell does work. In fact, one of the companies that we studied does that. It was just a really interesting way to kind of operationalize a program that helps facilitate that experience of belonging. I didn't expect that to happen.
What kind of, as you were talking to these companies, what do you think were some of the major things? You just talked about this with LinkedIn. That seems like a pretty exceptional situation. So what are some of the things that these companies were doing to help encourage a atmosphere of belonging, to cultivate that within their people?
Yeah, great question. So I'm gonna give you kind of a broad theme, and then I'll give you some examples. So probably one of the biggest themes is that we don't work with an employee who does this job. We work with the human being who has these interests, right? So that was kind of one of the major themes. That look at the whole person, not the person's role in the company. And where that became really prevalent, so I'll give an example from Barry-Wehmiller. Barry-Wehmiller helped revitalize an entire community, right, by going in and setting up an office, and that was so important to the employee that it was like, okay, you're not interested in this because it's the right business decision. Well, absolutely, that was probably part of the conversation. It wasn't the only part of the conversation. This is important to this employee, and it can have a dramatic impact on the community. That's a very powerful way of saying, yeah, we want you to be successful here, and we also want you to know that we are interested in helping your life better even when you're not here at work, right? So that's one example. And that's pretty extraordinary, right? I think you used that word just a few minutes ago. But I would say that extraordinary is definitely a scalable construct, because I'll give you another example. At Canlis Restaurant, which is one Michelin star restaurant in Seattle, it's a family-owned business. The third generation that's running it are Mark and Brian Canlis, they're brothers. And you scale the extraordinary down to a small restaurant, right? Not a global organization like Barry-Wehmiller. So what does it look like there in terms of how Canlis shows their interest in the whole person and not just the employee? One of the things that makes Canlis so interesting is they don't see themselves as a restaurant. They see themselves in a hospitality business, and their mission is to turn people to one another. Right? Very fascinating. It's like, but you're a restaurant. Aren't you just there to make sure I have a great meal and maybe some great wine with my meal? But what drives them is we turn people to one another. And I think in a time today where it's so divisive in our society here, that's that's fascinating to me. Mm. So when we started exploring, well, what does it look like? You turn people to one another. They have these dining experiences that are very customized to each reservation. And the entire restaurant, the entire team that's working that particular night knows exactly what's going on with every reservation to make sure that whatever the experience is that guest is there to have, they are all participating in it in some way, right? So that's interesting, but what makes that work is the strong bonds between all the staff members. So when we look at the whole employee, in order for that night to go off where everybody who's working, even if they're not serving a particular table or guest, they know exactly what's going on with every reservation. In order to pull off that kind of coordination, the team they do this thing where they play together, where they might have some fun in the restaurant. They told me a story of like playing laser tag together, but also they study together, right? So they have this secret playbook that they would not show me, and I tried many ways to have them show it to me. This playbook that basically says, hey, this is how we conduct ourselves when we work here and serve our customers, or our guests, as they call them. So there's this interest in saying, yeah, we want you to work hard, but we also want you to play hard, and we want you to play hard together, and we want you to work hard together as well. So it wasn't just about, me showing up and doing my shift. It's about me showing up, knowing that you are interested in my success as well as the team's success. And people just show up in a different way. In fact, the brothers talked about, Mark and Brian talked about, being in relationship with one another. Now, for some people, that might sound really fluffy. And for some, I might agree. However, for them, it works, that it's the relationship. And if you're going to have a relationship with someone at Canlis, with your colleagues, it's not just about what they're doing. They take an interest in knowing what are your aspirations. One of their employees was studying to be a sommelier, and they all helped make sure that this person got time off to be able to study for that, because that sommelier designation was important to him as a professional goal as well as to the business. So it's those little things like that I think, that doesn't take much money. You don't have to come up with some major culture program. It's a simple idea to say we focus on the whole employee. Now, how do we make that work for us at the company? So we continue to find those really beautiful nuggets in the research that we did.
Does the idea of a shared mission, how much does that contribute to belonging, or is the seriousness in which people view the work that they do, is that a result of belonging? I don't know if I'm being clear in that. Maybe that's a little convoluted, but oftentimes when people have a similar task or a similar mission that they need to get done, that'll help everybody rally. Does that happen more times than not, or is it the people are already rallied together and that gets them to the finish line?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter there. So, that's so like at Canlis again, or even LinkedIn, where there was this, those two organizations are known for, their kind of purpose-oriented culture, right? So it already attracts people who are, in alignment with that line of thinking in terms of business's role in society or the community. And I think that's maybe where these companies get a leg up over others. It's like, no, you have to believe in the mission before you get here, and we're going to make sure in the hiring process that this truly resonates with you, because once you start, it's a whole nother game. It's not about convincing you that our mission is important, because you've already bought in on that. It's about how do we then come together to do what we need to do as a team or as a unit or as an organization. But we're going to do it in a way that really is around making sure we connect. We have the sense of belonging. There are other constructs that help facilitate that. But the mission is really kind of like table stakes. And the rest then becomes much more focused on practices that help facilitate that experience of belonging. And I should say, for somebody who's listening to the interview, obviously it's not just belonging that contributes to high-performing teams. There's a lot that goes to that, and there have been books written about this, thousands of them, right? I'm specifically just talking to the way that belonging can facilitate that kind of extraordinary results.
Belonging is kind of the roux of the secret sauce.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
With the companies that you interviewed, they seem to be a very diverse list of companies and a diverse number of team members. Let's talk about that for a second. If you're a 12,000 team member company like Barry-Wehmiller, or if you're a 50-person company, how does belonging work there? Especially if you're an international company spread out as opposed to one location. Are there things, does some of that stuff matter? Does some of that stuff not matter? What are your findings there?
So this was actually a really kind of vexing question that Bruce is my research partner, that one of the things that he and I kept asking each other as we were going through the interview data is like, how do you scale belonging, right? So you got Canlis Restaurant, it's a medium-sized business. Then you've got Barry-Wehmiller with 12,000 employees globally, right? How does belonging scale? And ultimately what we concluded, and I think there's probably still more exploration for this question, but ultimately what we concluded is that, belonging is really something that is kind of a personal experience. And in order for it to be personal, or the reason why it's personal, is because, as a team member, you're interacting with a small number of people on any given day. At Barry-Wehmiller, Brent, you're not interacting with 12,000 employees. Right? You've got probably different pockets of people that you see and interact with on a regular basis, right? Mm. So really those pockets then become those opportunities for belonging to emerge, right? So, okay, how does that happen? Well, one, you've got to make sure leaders understand their role in this place, and this is actually an important point we can come back to if you want. But also what we discovered in the interviews that we did in the model companies that are featured in the book is that it wasn't just the leaders who were shouldering the responsibility, it was also the employees, that it became, in some cases, a source of pride that, no, we value people feeling valued, wanted, and welcomed, and it's so important to us that it's a part of the way that we interact with each other. And so it's in how leaders are trained to pay attention to belonging, as well as making sure that employees shoulder that responsibility. So that's where you can kind of grow it to where it's not just this responsibility that rests on the shoulders of the company's leaders, but it's shouldered by everyone who works in the company. And that's what we started to make sense of. Well, how do you do this from small to global size companies? And it's not to say that it's going to be experienced by every single employee in the company, and that doesn't matter the size, right? If I have a really horrible leader who maybe, doesn't take an interest in me as a whole person, or maybe comes across as a bully in her behaviors, I'm not going to experience belonging. I'm going to be in a kind of protective mindset that keeps me on alert so that I am aware of when I step into corporate landmines, so to speak. So, you can have belonging, or you can have areas in the company where there isn't belonging because it's not fostered by that leader, or it's not just a focus.
Let's go back to something you were saying before about the role of leaders in belonging. I think you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting topic, and it's not a new topic. I think what we're finding is more research coming out. And so it's this, right? We know that when people leave a company, they don't leave a company, they leave their boss, right? And that's been a saying for a really long time. Well, companies like Gallup and Deloitte, the big companies that do this research, Gallup, for example, has found that 82% of management hires, and I know manager is not a word that Bob Chapman is fond of, but there's an important distinction here, and there's a reason why I'm using that language. But they find that 82% of managers that are hired are ill-equipped to do their job. And that ill-equipped part of the job is not, the tasks of managers, planning, organizing, strategizing. It's in the soft skills. And so this is, I think, probably the first time that I've seen lots of different research coming out saying organizations have underinvested in the development of soft skills in their leaders, aka managers, right? So, I think it becomes really important for companies to look at, okay, wait a minute. First of all, how do you train someone to be empathetic if they've never been empathetic before, right? And that's a big question, right? But empathy is a huge component of contributing to belonging, right? If I can empathize with you, then I'm going to have a deeper understanding of where you're coming from when we have differences. So the question becomes, if we're going to have leaders inspire experiences of belonging through their leadership, companies aren't investing in the skills, in the training, in the workshops, in the coaching, whatever it takes for their leadership to actually know how to intentionally shape an environment that where belonging is experienced, and that's a huge undertaking. It's easy to teach someone, hey, here are our budgeting practices, right? That's much easier than helping someone who might have bullying tendencies learn empathy, or be willing to invest in putting their tribe, aka team, first and not their own agenda, right? I mean, those are just different mindsets that companies haven't really said, wait a minute, what is the mindset of our leaders? We need to be intentional about saying, this is what we expect from you, not just managing and running a profit and loss statement, but also knowing how to motivate and inspire your team. And so I think that is, if there's an area where companies really want to start investing in, that's it. And there's a huge conversation around that in terms of how does that work, and it hasn't worked previously, so why now? And but there's definitely there's more research coming up that shows that we've got to invest differently in how we build leaders in our organizations. And you guys do a phenomenal job about that with that there at Barry-Wehmiller. Saying.
Yeah, we try, and that's something that Bob is constantly on the stump about, is retraining leaders to be able to care. And you're right. The soft skills are the hard skills, but they're the skills that are really the most important ones. Something that I think is interesting in terms of what the work that you've been doing is thinking about it. Tribe means a lot of things to a lot of people, and sometimes we can see kind of tribalism go rampant. Is there anything that that in your research in terms of a sense of belonging and becoming a tribe and a group that goes to a negative place?
Yeah. So there are a couple of ways to answer that. So one is, in the context of work, the experiences of belonging, belonging meaning I feel valued, wanted, and welcomed. It can't just be about the feel goods that come from, oh, you really value what I contribute, or, yeah, you really care about me as a human being, or, yeah, I have a place on the team. While all of that is crucial, without one other layer, it just makes work to be this place where, yeah, it feels good, and I love the people that I work with. That's not enough from a business perspective. The added layer to this is that there is a focus on results, right? So, belonging is one way to help really bring teams closer together. And then the added layer to that, and this was something that we learned, is that the leaders in these companies have this grounding in business fundamentals. So it's like, okay, so I've got a profit and loss statement that I'm managing, or I've got a portfolio of products that need to be introduced to the market over the next, 2 years. One of the questions that leaders in these companies are asking is not just what operationally needs to be in place, but how do I ensure my employees feel that they can do their best work. So there's the two levels of helping ensure that the experience of valued, wanted, and welcome is there, also being grounded in business fundamentals and making sure people are aware of progress and making sure people are aware of all those typical things that we teach managers, right? So it's really bringing those together and making it as transparent as possible, rather than, management of the days ago, things happen in a black box. I come to you as my individual contributor or my direct report and tell you, hey, I need you to do this, but you really don't have any insight into that black box. If you want people to feel valued, wanted, and welcome, there needs to be a greater level of transparency into what was a black box. Now it's like, here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Here's how I see you contributing to this, doing meaningful work, finding fulfillment in the work that you do, is also part of the conversation. So that's one area where belonging, if it doesn't have that grounding in business fundamentals, it's just a feel-good thing, goes away as a fad, and maybe never really sticks, across the organization. The flip side to that are those team members who might act in ways that prevent belonging to occur in the first place. So ostracizing employees, bullying employees. And in the book, there's actually a condensed version of a well-known research questionnaire around bullying. And I remember going through it going, oh, as a consultant, I saw these kind of behaviors all the time. And what was interesting to me is that, or what would be interesting for me to hear from those who read the book is, would some of these behaviors even be something that you would associate with bullying? Repeated reminders of your errors and mistakes, having false allegations made against you, which is probably more akin to bullying. But whether it be a leader or an individual contributor or team member, when they are allowed to act in ways that undermine what the team is trying to accomplish because maybe they're a high performer, that's going to prevent belonging from occurring at all. So that's nothing that the organization is doing directly. It's what an individual on the team is doing. Ostracizing someone is probably, and I wrote about this in my first book, ostracism is way worse than bullying, which sounds crazy. And the reason for that is when people are ostracized, they're ignored, right? So for our human need is to actually have the sense of belonging. At least with bullying, you're paying attention to me. It might be negative, but what researchers find is that the damaging effects of ostracism are far greater than bullying. Is when we feel ignored and we see that we're intentionally being ignored and not invited to be part of conversations, not invited to be part of decisions or a team, that has such significant impact psychologically on people that it has a more profound effect than the bullying does, which is crazy because they're both horrible, right? So I don't want to say one better than the other. One just has greater effects, bad effects than the other.
Yeah. So after the writing and the release of your book, where's the hope? Where are you seeing that more companies are accepting of this?
Yeah, so I hate to sound cliche or trite. I think what we're seeing still is that millennials continue to advocate for work experiences that are more meaningful, that are fulfilling, that allow them to have greater flexibility in when and where they work. And even my generation, which is Generation X, where we're now going, oh my gosh, I got to care for my aging parents, and I need a company that actually can flex with me, that I can work from the hospital while my dad's in the hospital, but I don't feel guilty about it. And the hope in this is that millennials have been surfacing conversations. Gen X starting to do so, and I might be understating that somewhat, but there's this kind of grassroots effort saying, if you want me to work for you, you got to offer to me more than just a paycheck and benefits. While yes, those are important, I also want these things: greater work flexibility. I want to be able to work on meaningful projects. And I think the hope is that organizations are now starting to go, okay, we've got to figure this out. I'll give you an example. I can't say the company name, but there's a large, major corporation, legacy organization that's been around for, I believe it's over 100 years, right? And they recently had to totally rethink where their employees work, because their employment agreement was, if you're going to work for us, you have to work in this location. Well, that location wasn't desirable. So they weren't getting the talent that they wanted. They just were getting people who just wanted a job. Well, no company wants to hire people who are just wanting a job, right? Fog and mirror? Yeah, you can work here. No, we want you to fog and mirror, but we also have a lot more that we expect from you. And so this company totally overhauled its talent strategy, as well as working with the leaders to start rethinking their role in how they lead their teams. So that's where the hope comes for me, is that companies are starting to go, yeah, there's truth to these claims that these writers and researchers have been publishing for, we'll just say, the last 10 years, right? Obviously, it's been longer than that. So that gives me hope that as millennials move into decision-making roles, that these constructs that Barry-Wehmiller, LinkedIn, Canvas Restaurant, Container Store all hold to be very important to not only the company's success, but their team members' successes.
Don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller. And you can find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.